What a week it was in college football and on the recruiting trail. Alabama, Georgia, UCLA, they were the winners of the week in recruiting after impressive showings on the field and some good news from top recruits. And on the flip side, most of the Pac-12, Miami, Wisconsin, LSU, and Baylor, they were the losers of the week in the college football recruiting season's week one. But hey, you're not a loser if you're listening to this podcast. Welcome into the second edition of Over the Middle, the best college football recruiting podcast around. I'm your host, Jeremy Crabtree, and I'm the senior recruiting editor for On3. We're brought to you by the amazing folks at YourView, the home for the best live high school football coverage from coast to coast. If it's a top matchup in Oklahoma, YourView has you covered. The same is true in Arizona, Louisiana, Nebraska, Kansas, and other corners of the country. Be sure to log on to watch.yourview.com. Once there, you can subscribe to access to all the top games from across the country, or you can do kind of like I do sometimes, pick up a single game matchup that jumps out to you for only $7.99. I can't wait for this week's feature matchup in Oklahoma when the best rivalry, yes, the best rivalry in high school football is renewed. It's Jinx versus Union, pageantry, tradition, plenty of top talent will be on display, and you can watch it only on YourView. All right. Let's dive into this week's topic. Actually, it's kind of a continuation of what we talked about last week with On3 national analyst Jerry Hamilton. The name, image, and likeness era in college athletics is less than 2 months old, and it's already reshaping the college football recruiting world. Recruits say the ability to land endorsement deals is influencing how they go through the decision-making process, and schools are working hard to make sure that they stay relevant with their ability to ensure players can market themselves if they come to their program. It's taken a while to get to this point where student athletes can profit out their brand, but there's one guy that saw this seismic change coming in college sports 9 years ago, and I'm honored to have him here on Over the Middle. Welcome in, Blake Lawrence, the CEO of Opendorse.
Jeremy Crabtree, I'm happy to be here, and I don't deserve that praise, man, but I'll take it. I thank you very much.
Well, Blake, we're going to talk at length about Opendorse and the NIL, but I saw this explanation when you visited last week with Bussin' on the Boys on the Barstool podcast. Explain what Opendorse is like we're a 5-year-old.
There you go. Opendorse is the most innovative and compliant way that athletes can monetize their name, image, and likeness. There's more than 55,000 athletes around the world now use our products. And they download the app, they sign up, they create a profile that they list out their interests and their location, their connections, their sports, and it allows any brand or fan who goes to opendorse.com, creates a free account to find an athlete, understand what their interests are, and pitch them an offer, right? A deal to make an appearance, to post on social media. And really the entire thing is built to make it easy for athletes to capitalize on this value that they've worked so hard to create. And then for the brand and fan, really easy to access that athlete. And, you'll really find it's as easy as booking a trip on Expedia or booking a place to stay on Airbnb. Just instead of having a place to stay or a flight to catch, you've got an athlete that is now supporting your business or creating opportunities that are unique to you as a fan.
Well, your company is amazing, but so is your story of how you got here. So let's get in the Wayback Machine and set the table of how the heck you got to this point. Blake, you and I actually know each other going back to 2005, 6, and 7, when you were a 4-star linebacker prospect coming out of Shawnee Mission West in Overland Park, Kansas. And back then I was the national recruiting editor at rivals.com. You had plenty of recruiting attention, but you picked Nebraska. Since we always love hearing good recruiting stories on Over the Middle, tell us what you remember most about your recruitment, how you ended up in Nebraska.
Oh boy. Well, I would say that, Jeremy, I wouldn't be where I am today without you, so I'll give you all the props in the world. I got a lot of love and coverage from the old Crabtree stories back in Rivals era. But I'm thankful for my experience as a recruit and, going to Nebraska. Very first time I grew up a Kansas State fan. So Bill Snyder had just retired. Ron Prince was there. And so I felt like I wanted to explore my options. So I went to Nebraska and, growing up, I was taught that we didn't like Nebraska as K-State fans, right? Then I showed up, I look around and I saw 90,000, people in the stadium. And I said, I understand why we don't like these guys. I mean, they got everything. I mean, this was Nebraska football. And so I fell in love. The fan base was tight there. And now I'm 16 years old. I'm walking down the street on my just an unofficial visit.
Yeah.
And somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, Blake, like, it's really good to see you here." And I'm like, this stranger knows who I am. Like, this fan base is very into, the recruiting experience. And that really gave me great perspective. Like, Nebraska football is a way of life in that state. And I'm thankful I made that decision. It's had a big impact on my business career as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And you went on to have a pretty solid career at Nebraska, a 3-year letter winner, but your career was cut short due to recurring concussions. But what I love about your story, and you touched on it there, you made sure you used the opportunity at Nebraska to prepare yourself for life after football. I mean, Nebraska just didn't get something out of you. You got something out of Nebraska.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, in April 2009, I in spring ball, I suffered my third concussion in a year. And at that point, I gave myself an ultimatum that if I were to suffer another concussion, I'd be done with football forever. I mean, it was scary, Jeremy. I was forgetting my name and where I was and the plays. And despite what you know about Nebraska football, like, at one point, it was really good to know the plays. So I decided that if I got one more, I'd be done. And then at that time, there was this white website called twitter.com that just kind of started to grow. And I created an account there. And I said, if I may be done with football sooner than I want, but if I can build an audience on this little tool, maybe I could stay connected to this fan base. And less than 6 months later, my career was done. I suffered my fourth concussion in a little over a year, and I stepped away. But from there, I had 1,000 people that followed me on Twitter, and I really said, this right here might be a way that athletes can preserve and capture some of this value. So I've really dedicated my whole career to helping athletes understand that, hey, sports doesn't last forever, and you can use tools and technology to build an audience that does last forever.
So 3 years after you're done playing football, Opendorse was birthed. How did you see the forest through the trees? I mean, how did you be so far ahead of the game than everybody else to realize that there is this business opportunity for college athletes?
Well, I would say, Jeremy, if you put the athlete in the middle, there's been an evolution in the world of marketing and how individuals monetize their value. And this is not just in sports. Like, think about this podcast run right now. Think about the way that individuals are becoming their own media companies, their own personalities. And in the world of sports, the athletes are the center of the entire industry, right? And what's interesting is that everyone else is telling their story, but social media, digital media has given them a path to tell their story. And so I'll go back in time in 2011. One of my best friends got drafted to the New York Giants, Prince Amukamara.
Yeah.
And he went from a couple thousand followers to 100,000 followers overnight. And he gave me a call and said, "Hey, what do I do with this? What happens next?" And they said, "Well, if you continually engage this audience, like, then maybe businesses want to pay you." I was like, "Well, then how do I manage when they want to pay me? Like, how do I know what I want to do? And then how do I know what to say?" And like, there's just a lot of questions. And he's like, "Well, Blake, why don't you just be my agent, or like, can you build an agency?" I said, "I'm not going to build an agency, but I will build an app, right? I will build an app for you that you can use, a tool that helps you say the right thing at the right place, right time, and fulfill your contracts and endorsement deals, get you more opportunities." And so we really built this thing for one athlete. But a month after we started Opendorse, the NFL Players Association caught wind of it, asked if we would fly out to Washington, D.C. and see if they could use the technology for every NFL player. That was a serendipitous moment. We hopped on the flight and sat down and explained this vision that we had, that, someday athletes will use apps, not just their agent, to monetize and make money through endorsements. And they believed in that vision. So we partnered with NFLPA, and now fast forward a decade, from one athlete to now 55,000 athletes around the world. And then NIL hits college sports, and it's just kind of exploded our world in a good way.
Yeah, no, and I remember even when I was transitioning from ESPN to try to find my next gig, I visited your guys' headquarters, 4 or 5 years ago. And at that time, you were kind of already trying to crack the code on how student athletes and even recruits should monetize their brand. And so you were already, yes, it was great to have the NFL and the FLPA, but you were already thinking well ahead from the college athlete standpoint.
Right. And I think a lot of things that we say is that, name, image, and likeness monetization is new to college sports, but it's not new to sports. In the professional world, athletes have been monetizing their name, image, and likeness for a century.
Yeah.
And that world in the last decade has evolved from being heavily agent driven to more application driven. Like, there's more technology being used to help pro athletes make money today than ever before. But The pro athlete market in North America is about 5,000 athletes. The student athlete market in North America is 500,000 athletes. So it's 100 times larger market. And we've been working in college sports with some of our other products for 5+ years. And that's really put a perfect storm, if you will, right? To have relationships in both the school and student athlete side, but also on the sponsor and brand side of things. And now all those worlds come together with NIL, and we're proud to be the leader in the space.
It like you said, it took multiple years to get to this point where July 1st finally happened. And what was there, a dozen state laws that took effect that kind of kicked this into process? And I know there's talk of federal legislation on the way, but make no mistake, the NIL world is here to stay.
Yeah, no doubt. And the brands and fans are eager to support athletes directly. That's what we found. Student athletes are, earning in the hundreds of dollars a month, which for some is not going to be a headline catching thing. But, imagine that you're a women's volleyball player getting paid $200 to record a 30-second video to wish good luck to a local sports team. Like, that's the type of things that we're seeing happen within Opendorse. And it shows that, again, the national headlines are going to point towards the $1 million payday for the big name quarterback. But every student athlete that can put an extra $100 or so in their pocket every month is that's transformational, right? It really is for the student athlete experience. Now, some will make millions, but most will make hundreds and maybe even thousands of dollars. And it's a big thing for student athletes across the country.
Yeah, you're touching on a couple points I want to hit on here in just a second, especially the women's aspect. I'm very, very curious about this. But so as we're taping this, we're 69 days into the world of the NIL. And what has been your biggest observation of this new world? I read a quote that you said that college athletes are making endorsement money at a higher clip than even you anticipated.
Yeah, certainly. I think that right now, for those obviously talking about football, 60% of all NIL compensation is going to college football players right now. Like, that's an interesting thing. And it's like some of the seasonality is a big part of that. There's also the sheer quantity of college football players and interest in the sport. So college football, everyone knows, is probably different than everything else in college sports. And the brands and fans are spending differently with college football players than others. But in terms of the pace at which this market is growing, or what it's looking like, if things stay as they are in the first 2 months, we just analyzed all this data, the first 2 months, then across the industry, using our data and our data set and extrapolating across all of NCAA, there should be about $1.5 billion spent in the first year on name, image, and likeness compensation. Yeah, so there is real dollars flowing to the market, an industry that popped up overnight. And right now it's a little bit wild west. There's going to be more regulation and rules, but right now it's kind of a free for all. And we're just making sure that athletes are doing things they have to do to stay compliant, capitalize on this value. And so as a partner to these student athletes, like, we're here in their back pocket, keeping them, straight in line. The market is doing a lot of wild things, but we got to make sure that athletes keep their eligibility as they engage with NIL.
Yeah, we're going to get to the pitfalls in just a second, because I've talked to a lot of college coaches and high school coaches that are very curious about the potential pitfalls in the world that we might be in a year from now. But you did touch on women's volleyball players, and yes, obviously football players drive the bus. I'm assuming men's basketball is probably second. So I'm kind of curious where women athletes fall into this. Are we seeing a lot of transactions in women's sports? I mean, as I'm a father of 3 aspiring soccer players in college, and I'm really curious to see if they have a chance to make some money off this deal.
Well, I just looking at the first 60 days. This is data that we haven't even released yet, so you're hearing it here first. Across the first 60 days of NIL across the data set that we analyze, which are student athletes from across about 300 different NCAA institutions that are part of this data set. The average male athlete has earned $530 from NIL activities in the first 2 months. The average female has earned $295. So there is a little bit of a gap there. And as a whole, about 80% of dollars are going to male student athletes, 20% to female student athletes in our data set. There are a lot of interesting like data points from the top 10 most marketable student athletes in the country. About 7 of those are female student athletes. So
Really?
Yeah, it's very top heavy in terms of female student athletes and their online marketability. So very large online audiences for the female student athletes versus males on average, but the compensation is still flowing to males at a higher clip and mostly to college football players right now.
So not everybody's going to get a Dr. Pepper ad. What's been the leading driver of player revenue? Is it social media? Is it licensing, or is it something else?
Great question. So again, looking at the first 2 months, 48% of data, or of the 48% of compensation is from posting content on social media.
Okay.
19% from licensing rights, so licensing your NIL to a business to use on their own. Another 13% from signing something, so signing autographs, right? So that's kind of the top heavy side of this, is that about, what's the quick math? Almost 90% of dollars are going towards, social media promotions, licensing activities, and signing autographs. And then the rest of it's split amongst a subset of different types of activities. So social media is driving the majority of dollars in the NIL compensation space for student athletes. And fans should be okay with that, because it's really a distraction-free, lightweight way to help athletes monetize their name, image, and likeness.
Yeah, and it kind of ties back to what you saw when you were first starting this thing, about how Twitter, an opportunity to do something with Twitter. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, college football, college athletics is very social media friendly. So it to me, at least, it makes sense that you would want to advertise where fish where the fish are, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's for if you take a student athlete's name, image, and likeness out of their social media feed and put it on a billboard, it takes an extra stretch to understand who that is, right? But what makes social media so interesting for individuals monetizing their name, image, likeness is that it's compact. Like, who this person is. They're in your feed because you elected to follow them, which means that you opted into it. Like, you're the perfect consumer, right? So the social media audience of a student athlete is incredibly valuable for brands. They've never been able to tap into it.
I'm curious, like, have you heard any response from advertisers yet? Do they feel like they're getting bang for their buck?
Certainly. I was late to this podcast because I was hopping off with a national advertiser who's looking to repeat some of the success that other brands have had. I mean, this is, again, to give you perspective, the average, right, for a student athlete is, we said, like $480 in the first 2 months of NIL. The median is around $30. So like student athletes are willing to promote products or, hawk something for as little as $30. And what's interesting about that is that there's no professional athlete in the world whose agent would let them do anything for $30, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense economically. And it's, but truthfully, if you go and talk to a young athlete, again, another $30 in the pocket is a big deal. So, I mean, we're seeing more advertisers kind of come in around that $100 for a tweet, $100 to record a video. And I just want every listener to think back to college and think about having a $100 bill in your pocket heading into a Friday night. Like, you would feel like the wealthiest person on campus. And so it is about perspective. It's about the realities of this. And then national advertisers are more willing to work directly with student athletes because there's not so much of the nuances of working with talent agencies and some of these long, like trying to turn a $1,000 deal into a 1,000-day long endorsement campaign. It just doesn't happen in the student athlete space, and advertisers like that.
Yeah, I'm curious how fickle the market's going to be here, because obviously I'm sure you saw the tweet from Darren Rovell last week that pointed out Graham Mertz, who Kansas City kid, love Graham to death. And I know you know his story well, one of the most heavily recruited quarterbacks in the country. He did not have a good week in week one, but Darren Rovell said his stock and market value plummeted. Are we going to see Are advertisers that fickle that they're going to have a guy's stock and market looking at brand drop off just one game?
Really important for every listener to understand, especially those that are looking to do a deal with a student athlete. There's 3 things that can get a student athlete in trouble, okay? And 3 things get you in trouble if you're supporting student athletes in NIL this way. Number 1, no quid pro quo. So if an athlete is getting paid for something they did not do, that's an issue. Number two, performance-based compensation. So if you're paying an athlete dependent on their athletic performance, like literally saying for every touchdown you throw, you get $100, that's a big no-no. The third one is no enrollment inducement. So being able to say that you are able to get this NIL deal so long as you're enrolled at Wisconsin, like that's a no-no as well. So those are the three things you need to understand. So when Graham Mertz or any student athlete doesn't perform as expected, if a business owner cancels a contract or lowers their compensation based on that, they're proving it's performance-based pay, and that's a big no-no. So every athlete that's signed opportunities with businesses are going to get what they're due. Now, fans are the ultimate voters in terms of where dollars can be earned based on your on-field performance. So if an athlete succeeds and they have their own merch line, they'll probably sell more merch. If they have a bad weekend, they'll probably sell less. And so is the market. And I would say that brands are not as fickle as fans. Fans are not driving the majority of dollars in the market right now, but someday that will be true, that fans will be driving as much of NIL compensation as brands are today. And in that space, week by week performance in college football will impact a student athlete's NIL earnings.
Yeah, I'm curious. You touched on a couple of potential pitfalls there, and the no quid pro quo or promises being made by college coaches to come here and you will get this deal. I guess, what are your biggest concerns or worries about the NIL, and where does education from the college program come into this discussion?
Yeah, so Opendorse, we have a product called Opendorse Ready, which more than 25 of the top programs in the country used as their NIL education solution. We're actually closer to 50 now.
Okay.
And we go in and we're on campus, and I was at an ACC school that is normally in the top 10, top 5 in the country a couple weeks ago, and on site with student athletes talking to them about NIL and what to expect. And for listeners, there's 3 things that I think would be entertaining. The first one is that I'll just tell you the one thing I think that listeners should chuckle is that student athletes are learning about taxes for the very first time.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
I mean, these kids, like at a separate trip, man, Jeremy, I was on, I said, hey, if you get $1,000 for an appearance, how much should you set aside for taxes? And student athlete said, what do you mean? I said, well, how much? And then I said 30%. He goes, $300, man. The NCAA is always trying to get us, right? And I said, no, that's not the NCAA. That's the USA,
yes.
So I think kids have to learn about those things. And then because they become a business. I mean, student athletes are quickly becoming their own business entity. And depending on state laws and school rules, the school can have lots of involvement or no involvement. So somebody has to be helping athletes learn about this. And that's kind of where Opendorse has become a trusted source as well.
Yeah, you hit on something. I talked to a Big Ten coach last week, and he said there's going to be a lot of stories written a year from now where Uncle Sam's going to come knocking on Johnny 5-star quarterback's door because he didn't pay his taxes, and that's maybe one of the potential downfalls of the NIL. And then other recruiters are also concerned about broken promises and how prospects are maybe making unwise decisions because of the NIL and promises made by coaches. So as a former recruit yourself who heard all the pitches, heard everything, hosted official visits, been on campus when all these recruits, mom and dads were there, what would you advise recruits? Where should where should the NIL rank when it comes to important factors in a decision?
Well, I have a hard time with empathizing with the student athlete that has NIL as part of the pitch now, because I simply wasn't in that world, but I am in that world now from a different perspective. What I would tell any student athlete in the recruiting experience, just based on my experience, is that you commit to a school. You do not commit to a coach. It is unlikely that your position coach, D coordinator, or head coach will be the same person by the time you graduate. That's not, the stats don't add up. So commit to a school, to a program that supports you for life. Like the academic affairs group at Nebraska, still some of my closest friends. The life skills department, still some of my closest friends. They're still there 5 head coaches later. And like that's it is really important that has a factor. NIL should weigh certain circumstances more than others. But right now it's all speculation. Like in a decade, heck, even 5 years from now, like it will be known, like as schools, the NIL compensation for student athletes at a school will be as well known as their attendance record, right? Because you cannot fudge the numbers. Ultimately, one school will be able to show that their student athletes have earned more, and that should have an impact or a weight. But again, it still comes down to that athlete's marketability and their ability to lean into it. So NIL is part of the factor now. It will become more real as we get deeper into the market.
Yeah, you can't repeat what you just said enough. That pick a college choice on the school and the other factors other than who your coach is or how much money you might make long term with NIL. Pick because you want to go to Nebraska or K-State where I went to, because where you go to is going to shape the rest of your life. I mean, it's where you meet a lot of people. You meet your best friends for the rest of your life. It's where you meet you're often who you marry or where you get a job at. So all those factors are important. So you cannot preach that enough, Blake. And I'm happy you said that, because that's a home run that I think needs to be hammered home all throughout this recruiting process. Yeah,
certainly. I think that schools that are investing heavily in NIL are doing it with the right intentions, because this is a life skill. I mean, there's no part of, if a student athlete makes $1 on campus, great. But if they learn really quickly that what they say online matters and how they represent themselves matters, like it's not about getting an endorsement deal, it's about getting a job offer. And that is a great outcome of NIL, is that it used to be that a select few athletes learned the power of their voice, the value of what they do and say. But now every student athlete at every campus across the NCAA is learning that the day they walk on campus. So that is the upside of NIL. Some dollars and cents are going to flow. It's going to impact recruiting. But student athletes are learning life skills earlier in their career, and that's a win for everybody.
Yeah. So ballpark, how long will it take for us before this all feels like this is a normal part of college athletics? Is it a decade from now? Is it 5 years from now?
I would say that when the EA Sports video game comes back and when you can buy a jersey from your favorite player on every campus, like that's when NIL has fully cemented itself as here to stay as part of the experience. There's a lot of gimmicky things happening across the market right now. And some of those things will be fleshed out when federal legislation comes down or the NCAA is actually empowered to create some standardization across the country. Right now, the discrepancy and disparity, just the differences across the country create challenges. Certain schools are at a definitive advantage in NIL and other ones are at a definitive disadvantage. So those things will get sorted out. But when a fan sees today, and I really urge you, whether you like NIL or hate NIL, I want you to understand, like, that's a kid that most likely worked their tail off to be in a position where somebody does want to pay them. And when they do support a business, they do support a brand, they do something for themselves. If you want to support that student athlete, like, click on that link, watch that video, buy that product, shop for their merchandise, because that's the best way to directly support the student athlete. And it's going to be fun. It is fun. It is crazy, but it's going to be fun to see it evolve.
Yeah, no doubt. And Blake, I think we could talk about this for days. And there is no question that the NIL has forever changed college and high school athletics. We really didn't even talk. I mean, we could probably talk a whole nother hour about your thoughts on prospects skipping their senior seasons, and that's I think that's a whole nother can of worms there. But I'm truly excited and one, proud of everything that you've accomplished there at Opendorse. But I'm truly excited to see what you have up your sleeve next at Opendorse, because you guys, again, you were way ahead of the curve with this, and I'm sure you guys got some cool stuff in the works. But most importantly, I love that you've made it your mission in life to empower athletes and their brands, and you've done some truly life-changing work.
No, I appreciate that, Jeremy. I would say, again, go back when we were writing stories about my recruiting journey, like, everyone has dreams, wants, and wishes for what happens when you start down this path as a recruit, right? And you dream of the NFL and you dream about achieving all those goals and ambitions. And for one reason or other, sometimes you don't get there. But that doesn't mean that sports didn't provide you an opportunity and a path. So for me, I feel as if I'm just trying to help athletes live out the same path that I went on, which is once this is done, have something to show for it, do something with it. Opendorse is really built upon that vision, and it's happy to help many, many more athletes today with all this NIL and many more to come. So thanks for giving me the time to talk about our story, but always good to catch up.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I was doing some research for this podcast, and I stumbled on an old picture of you the day that you committed to the University of Nebraska, and actually believe we did it on Rivals Radio. You announced your decision. That's way back when we did things on the radio before YouTube and podcasts and things like that. And you had the Nebraska hat on, and what I dug most was the cordless phone that you had up. That is early 2000s cordless phone.
That's right.
You look the part, though, man. And again, I can't thank you for taking 30 minutes out of your busy schedule to knock this out. And I think it's important. It was an important story for folks to listen to, but also think it's an important topic that we need to pay attention to in college athletics, because it's touching everything.
Yeah, I'll be a source and plug for you whenever you need some data, some numbers. I got you. And again, thanks for letting me share the story.
All right, man. Thank you so much, Blake. All right, folks, that was Blake Lawrence, the CEO of Opendorse. And that's it for this week's edition of Over the Middle. Once again, I'm your host, Jeremy Crabtree with On3, and we cannot do this show without the support from the great folks at YourView. Again, YourView is your home for the top high school football matchups from Arizona to Rhode Island and everywhere in between. Head over to watch.yourview.com and check out some of the great matchups slated for this week. And don't forget, YourView has that Jinx Union game, and that is always, always, always one of the best high school football games of the year. That's not the only big game this week, and there are more on the way that we'll talk about throughout the season. Thanks again for joining us on Over the Middle. God willing, we'll be back to talk to you next week.